Good morning and welcome to California Woodcrafters. Thank you for stopping by my channel. In today's video, it's a continuation of table saw basics for the beginner. The first video I posted, we went over rip cuts and I talked about doing some cross cuts on the table saw. The table saw has some limitations when it comes to cross cuts that any beginner needs to be aware of. One of the most important things is that if I'm doing a crosscut on this particular piece of material would not be that unsafe, because as you can see, the cut I'm making goes along against the grain, and this piece of material is actually almost square. So therefore, I'm not going to be applying too much leverage to one side or the other. Normally, I would cut in this direction, and all my leverage is going to be going that way. Now, if I was using a thinner piece of material, such as, and I'm just going to grab this piece of plywood, kind of give you an example. If I was trying to make this cut, there's too much leverage on this side of the stock that inevitably it would be very difficult to control and not have the material come away from the fence based on the leverage that I'm applying on this piece of wood. So normally it would not make this cut like this with the fence trying to cut through here, even with a push stick. Even if I put the push stick there, I'm still going to get too much leverage on this board. It can be done, and I've seen guys do it, but it is not really safe. Once you get too much leverage, this could pinch against the blade and then toss it this way. And it's not something you want to do or you want to experience. So normally, if you're doing a crosscut, you would use a miter gauge or a box sled, or most of us have miter saws that we use, and that's how we would make these crosscuts. Now, if you are, again, cutting something that is pretty much square, you're going to be safe, right? Even if you're doing a crosscut. So for all intents and purposes, probably the best way would be to not use the fence at all. To move the fence out of the way and grab your miter gauge and use the miter gauge. But this also has limitations, because now I am using this miter gauge, and I have to pull the miter gauge all the way out past the table in order to not start the saw with it touching the material. So that's a limitation. Therefore, it would probably be better if you use a sliding sled or a box sled, the way I call them, to make this cut. But if you were going to cutting a thinner piece of material, it shouldn't be a problem to use the miter gauge. I want to probably maintain the 6-inch rule that we talked about. I want to stay at least 6 inches away from the blade at all times. I don't want to get my hands close enough to the blade where if something happens, my hands are really too close to the blade and, anything can happen. Those of us who have these older table saws, we don't have the luxury of having a saw stop where the blade disappears, before your fingers or any part of your body actually comes close to the blade. This blade is going to continue to run until I physically turn it off. So I keep the 6-inch rule, keep my hands away from the blade when I make that cut. So I'm going to turn on the saw. Push all the way through. normally you don't have to necessarily wait for the saw to come to a stop. You can just push this to the one side and then bring this back, and that other piece of stock is going to be there. So a lot safer to do a crosscut with the miter gauge. The advantages of this miter gauge is that I can also make angled cuts at any angle that I need, depending on the project that I'm working on. So I'm just going to tighten this down and make this one angle cut. Now, I think my hand's far enough away, but you can use a tension clamp if you connect the tension clamp to your miter gauge and then put a clamp on there, and you should be okay. I'm far enough. I think I can make this cut without really putting myself in danger. So the good thing about the miter gauge is usually it doesn't come with this piece of plywood connected to it. That's something you do in order to give you a little bit more stability rather than just using the short part of the miter gauge that it comes with. If you extend it, you're going to have more stability and be able to do different types of cuts based on that, and cut longer pieces of material also without getting into danger of it moving a certain way. So the miter gauge is pretty versatile. It helps you do a bunch of stuff on the table saw, cut smaller pieces of material. But now, once I get to where my hands are really close to the blade, I'm going to run into problems. I have to clamp it down, or, it's just pretty scary when your hands get too close to that blade. So there's an alternative to that, and I'm going to show you that now. So put this miter gauge away, and I'm going to grab my sled. Okay, I've seen a lot of people use these, and mostly, they're without this part, which I call a safety guard, and they'll cut here, but your hands are still having to hold this, or they're still in the way. I mean, they're still going to be close to the blade, and your hands are still going to get close to the blade if I'm holding this, so that still makes it dangerous. And I'll show you exactly what I mean. So I'm going to raise that up to where it's barely cutting. Now with this part here, which I call a safety guard, I can set it down on any piece of material, and that's going to hold it enough to where it's not going to vibrate and move that piece of material as long as it's close to what I call the fence back here. The other thing that I've done, and if you notice on some of my other videos that I posted from back when I was still in the classroom, I built a good size dedicated to that saw. We had two saw stops in the classroom, and that sliding box was a lot bigger, and you cut a lot bigger material. This is pretty small, but what I like about it is that I put this plastic on top, and this was I built this pretty quick, so please don't treat me too harshly when it comes to comments. But it works. This is just a piece of plexiglass, which allows me to see what I'm cutting, and it just slides right over the top. Okay, now I'm going to make this cut, and just to show you that I can cut pretty small pieces and not get my hands anywhere close to that blade. And also the other thing is that if I'm cutting this on the miter saw, that's really close. Even on the miter saw, you don't want to do that. But here it's relatively safe. You're not going to, your hands aren't even close to the blade, and this piece of material is going to stay put. It's not going to move because I got the weight of the box on there, and I don't have to hold it. Okay. Normally I wait till the saw comes to a complete stop before I pull it back, and that's the safety recommendation, and there you have it. Now, people might say, well, how square is that cut? So if you look at that cut, it's pretty square, and that's just your adjustment when you make your box. So if you're going to cut really small pieces, you know, you can do it. And just to show you a little bit more, this is a pretty small piece, and there's no way that I can get a square cut on this piece anywhere else. If I cut it on a bandsaw, it's not going to be square. But using this, okay, it's going to stay put. And there's your cut. And it is square cut. Okay. So this gives you the ability to, especially if you're a hobbyist and you're doing small projects out of wood, this gives you the ability to cut any size material, smaller pieces to get safely without getting your hands anywhere near a blade, and you're still getting a square cut, and it just opens the door to a lot more types of projects because you're making safe cuts. You're not going to be in danger. So building a box sled, or a sliding sled, however you want to call it, is is going to help you. So and this was sitting around, and you know, I had to make some modifications in order to make it work, but it works. And building one is really going to help you out in your shop. So that's the miter gauge, the sliding box that allows you to make, you know, those different cuts. Just a short clip. One of the other things that I wanted to mention, this box slides pretty good. Right? It's not, you know, it's not binding anyway. It just slides pretty good. This lifts off pretty good, and you know, this might seem hokey, but this is just an old candle, and I use this to put on the bottom of the box and also on this guard here, so that it'll slide up and down, you know, pretty effortlessly without binding in any way. And as you can tell. So something that you could use to just make things slide is simple candle wax. You know, you could use beeswax, I guess. This is just what I had at home, so it worked out pretty good. All right, so I have this set up now just to make a beveled cut on this piece of material. It is currently set at about 25 degrees. Now, the problem that you have when you're doing this type of cut is the stock that's going through here is really under a lot of tension when it comes from the blade to the fence. So you got to be really careful with that. And then also the piece that's here sometimes rests against the blade, and it tends to vibrate and come this way. And if it catches a tooth, it's going to shoot it out. So in this case, you really have to follow my rule about standing to the side. Now, I noticed that in one of the videos that I was trying to shoot the other day, I'm standing right here, you know, where is a no-no for me. And that's just part of being complacent and, you know, trying to do things easier and faster and not really looking at safety. So by all means, don't be complacent. Make sure that, you know, you follow your safety rules in your shop so that you don't get injured. So I'm going to make this cut. I'm going to stand off to the side in case anything happens. But as you can tell also, I changed the plate here so that my blade can come over. If I was on this, using this zero plate, I wouldn't be able to tilt that way. Now you could make a new plate and then cut it with that angle. So if you're doing a bunch of 15-degree cuts, then you'd have a 15-degree plate to put in here. That way nothing falls inside, especially if you're cutting smaller stuff. But you're limited to what you cut because you don't want that to hit your fence here. I'll make this cut just so that you can see it. Remember, have your push stick right where you can have it, where you need it, where you can grab it. Again, you need to push all the way through so that it's not in between the blade and the fence to make sure it doesn't shoot back at you. Now you can see how this is resting. It didn't even tilt it back against here, and sometimes the teeth will grab it and kind of throw that to you. So you want to be very careful, stand off to the side. I use this process to make some of my paddles for my paddleboard in order to make the shaft of that. In fact, in some of the videos you'll see that I've done this for other things to make tubes or pipes out of wood, if you will, and it's very effective. It makes those things pretty strong. So just the versatility of a table saw and what you can do with it. Okay, by all means, if you have any comments or questions, please leave those. Thank you for stopping by. I hope that this helps you in your woodworking journey if you're a beginner. And as always, leave a like, subscribe, and God bless. We'll see you on the next one.